Okay, so now let's talk about some text tips that you can use that are very easy to help your slides look better from the start. There are 3 of them we want to focus on today. The first one has to do with what font you choose. There are 2 types of fonts. There are sans serif fonts and serif fonts, and you can see examples of those 2 here on your slide. Times New Roman is the default font, particularly if you're using something like PowerPoint. It's the default font that you get when you're writing a paper in a Word document. Default fonts are fine, but you do need to know how to change them back and forth depending on whether you're working with print material or you're working with something that will be projected. When you're using a print or a font for print material, Times New Roman is fine. A serif font is one that has thick and thin lines, and that doesn't project as well on a screen as a sans serif font. Sans serif fonts, all of the lines are a uniform width, and that's important when it's projected. So when you are thinking about your slides, use a sans serif font. Now you can see more clearly what that looks like with these 2 slides here. You can see the thinner lines that are highlighted in the slide at the top as opposed to a sans serif font which is displayed on the slide at the bottom right. So remember to change your font in your software if you're going to project the image. If it's a print material, Times New Roman is fine, and it's very easy to read in print form, not so easy to read in projection. So when you're working with your fonts, remember to use a sans serif font. One thing to remember about fonts is sizing. How big do you think the words text tips are on your screen? 24 point? 32 point? It's actually 72 point font. What happens when you're creating your slides is you're sitting about 6 to 8, maybe 10 inches from your computer screen, and if you put a 72 point font on your screen, it looks way too big, bold, and imposing. But remember, your image will be projected, and so you need to use as large a font as you possibly can. This is 72 point because it's the main point of the slide. A general rule of thumb is that 32 point for a title slide is minimum. 28 point font for the text on your slide is minimum. There should be a difference, that would be the contrast principle, between your body text and your title slide of at least 4 points. So use those guidelines when you are beginning to create your material and your content on your slide. Titles no less than 32 and the body text no less than 28. The next tip with text has to do with bullets. You need to know how to adjust the spacing or the proximity between your actual bullet and the text that comes next. There's such a thing as too close and too far away, and you need to get it just right. If you're using something like PowerPoint or Word document, it's called a hanging indent, which means the distance it hangs away from your actual text. That sounds like a really small, inconsequential principle, but let's look at it a little bit better in practice. If you look at this first example here, you'll see this text, and notice where is the second line aligned. It's aligned under the bullet point. That doesn't look very clean. Everything seems to run together. But look at the revision here when things are aligned. This is again where alignment comes into play. When they're aligned under the first letter of the line, it looks much neater and much more professional that way, and certainly easier to read. So let's take this concept of spacing and proximity a little further. Remember that we said that proximity is a principle to help your reader understand what goes with what. Right now, the spacing is exactly the same between the second line of each bullet and between each bullet. So how can we use the concept of proximity to help readers and viewers understand better what goes with what? Put some more space between each bullet, make that space different than between each line, and you can spread out your text using the concept of proximity to help your viewer read it more easily and quickly. Really small principle, but has more of an impact. Let's look at this example here. Tell me what's wrong with this quote. The quote is great, but the way it's displayed, what's wrong with it? 2 things you should immediately notice. One is it's a serif font. It's Times New Roman, and it shouldn't be. And where are the second and third lines aligned? They're aligned under the quotation mark. Quotation marks should be treated like bullets, and they should hang off of your text a little bit. So let's redo this a little bit and see what we could get. We changed the font. We put the alignment under the letter and not the quotation itself, and we've got something that's easier to read, much better aligned, and cleaner looking. Or we could do something like this, and we've got Aristotle. We changed the font entirely. This is actually a papyrus font and a picture of Aristotle. So use your fonts to your benefit to help communicate the feel or the tone of your message or the tone of your quote, but remember to use, whenever possible, sans serif fonts so that you don't get the mix of thin and thick lines. So those are some few pointers about text. Now let's talk about images. Where can you get the photos that are clean and clear and sharp? Well, you probably can't get them from the internet. Why can't you get them from the internet? There are two reasons you need to be very careful where you get your images from. The first one has to do with image resolution. You could go to the internet, do a search, right-click on the image you want, and save picture as and keep that file. But chances are that you've captured an image that is at 72 dpi, or dots per inch. So the resolution of that image is not very good. When you go to enlarge that image or project it on a very large screen, you're going to get something like this. It's called pixelation. That's not going to look good projected, and it's not going to serve your purpose. And things become grainy very quickly when you're getting your images from the internet. So where can you get good images? We'll talk about that in just a second. But the second thing you have to worry about are copyright laws. You can't just take anything from the internet and use it for whatever purpose you want just because you found it on the internet. You have to be concerned with the laws and the rights of the person who created the image. Now there are a couple of caveats to that. The first one is that you can use, in very limited circumstances, there's the principle of fair use, where you can use the images for educational purposes only or a one-time purpose only. But you have to be very careful with that. If you are going to use it in a print material that you intend to make copies of and distribute, you need to purchase the rights to that image. And where can you get images that are cheap? Because you're students and there isn't a lot of disposable income for images. So here are some sites that you can use to go and search for either free images or very inexpensive images. They are listed here, and Flickr is one that you might be familiar with and may have been to. Flickr has a whole database of images that you can access. Some are free, others are not, and have various licenses attributed to them. And that is under something called Creative Commons, which is explained on the Flickr website. The other ones, iStock Photo and Dreamstime, are all image databases. Some images are more expensive than others, and you can buy them in the different sizes. But you do need to recognize the image resolution and copyright before you just go and take an image from the internet. It's important that you have the right to use it. So next, we want to talk about animation. Now, all of these other principles that we've talked about, everything thus far has really dealt with things that show up on your screen and stay there. So why would we bring animation into a discussion of Public Speaking 3.0? Because you need animation sometimes to help communicate a point to your audience. It's important that they see things move. The eye is attracted to movement. It will catch our eye when things move across the screen, and movement can be very useful to keep your audience focused on you or whatever it is you're trying to show on the slide. So animation is more than just having your bullets come up one at a time. And animation can be overused. You probably have seen presentations where someone has discovered all of the different ways that things can flash and zoom and grow and shrink across the screen. But then the focus is the flashing and the zooming, not the content. So be very careful with that animation, that you use it for a reason, that it has a purpose, not just because it's cool and neat and is gee whiz. You don't want your audience to go, wow, that thing flew across the screen. You want to use animation so your audience understands your concept better. So we want to look, I have 3 examples of how you can use animation to teach something that's a little bit more abstract. So here's our first one, boring PowerPoint slide of dates. And you actually have to read each slide there to determine where the dates, whether they're BC or AD, and whether they're going from most recent to least recent, or whether they're even in chronological order. Still kind of a boring slide, and they came up all at once, so your viewer is reading way ahead of what you're saying. So instead of just animating the bullet points here so that they come up one at a time to keep your reader from reading ahead, what else could you do? Again, this goes back to visualization. You have to think, what am I trying to communicate, and how can I do that a little more visually? And this is all part of your speech development process. So this is a timeline. These are dates that go in some sort of an order. So very simply, you could create a timeline so that your bullet points appear as you are talking about each date on the timeline, which A, keeps your audience from reading ahead of you, and B, helps them see the progression of whatever you're talking about. And so timeline here is much more visual than just a bunch of words on a screen. Another example. Let's say that you're giving a marketing presentation and you're trying to stress the 4 P's of a marketing strategy, the 4 P's that are important. You could list the 4 words that start with P, or you could build an animation. So let's look at one very simple way to do this. So you're giving your marketing presentation and you're talking about the product and the place, the price, and the promotion of whatever your item is in terms of getting it to market and getting people to buy it. But in your presentation, what you really want to stress is that, well, those 4 things are really good, but you've left out the most important P. And the most important P for a marketing strategy are the people. And if you don't have the people, if you don't have an audience to buy your product, you're not going to sell anything. And so when you are creating your marketing strategy, you have to remember that the people are the basis of any marketing strategy, and the other 4 Ps only come after that. A really simple animation, but a lot more interesting to look at because of movement than listing 5 P words on a slide. The last animation I want you to go and take a look at on the web. This comes from this particular website here called Presentation Process. And this creator has taken the concept of in companies and weak ones versus strong ones and meeting customer expectations and animated it. And this is the address for you to watch that animation because it's an excellent example of taking something that's very abstract and using animation to help really communicate the point much more strongly than just words and bullets on a slide. So we've talked about a lot of things in these video segments. You've learned about visualization and visual design and text tips and the scrap method of creating better slides. All of these things are really important to helping you get to be a 3.0 public speaker. If you need any help with any of the concepts that we've talked about today, you can visit the Center for Excellence in Communication, where they have trained personnel, graduate teaching assistants, and tutors to help you practice any of these principles with the actual equipment that you would be using. They can also film you so that you can see what you look like using these principles and presenting a 21st century speech.